Good morning. I am Dick Hurwitz. Every Memorial Day reminds me how much I hate war. In junior high school, when I delivered the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette at 5:30 in the morning, I used to imagine what the world would be like if every mother in every country would simply refuse to let her son or daughter take up arms and go to war. But despite my feelings about war, every Memorial Day also reminds me how much I respect, honor, and am grateful to those men and women of our country who have taken up arms and defended the freedom I cherish so much. It never fails. At every Memorial Day parade, when I see those old men and women marching so proudly in their 50, 60, or 70-year-old uniforms, tears well up in my eyes, and in my mind, sometimes even for real, I salute their bravery and their sacrifice. Our reading this morning is by Reverend Stephen Schick, Minister Emeritus of the Unitarian Church of Marlborough and Hudson in Massachusetts. It's called Lives and Tears, and it comes from a UU prayer anthology called With or Without Candlelight. Spirit of life, God of love, walk with me through these rows of flags which represent those who have died in war. Slow my pace that I might touch each one and imagine the pain their loved ones felt when the news of death arrived. Let me wade into that river of saltwater tears, flowing from memories locked in the minds of mothers and fathers, husbands and wives, daughters and sons, sisters and brothers, and yes, of children. From row upon row let the salt water flow. Let it wash from me all vengeful thoughts and self-righteousness, my arrogance and self-serving intentions. On the banks of this new day, dry my eyes that I might see more clearly your vision of peace, where all men and women, whatever their beliefs, whatever their homelands, will beat their swords into plowshares and spears into pruning hooks and study war no more. With clear eyes, let me see the practicality of your vision and focus on how I can use my life to move the world a step closer to peace. Let me not dismiss your vision as futile or proclaim my life as insignificant, but let me walk out of these rows of flags cleansed by all the lives and tears they represent. We who call you by many names and worship you in many ways, we who may simply stand in silence before the wonders of the universe and the gift of life, pledge ourselves to shape our remaining days into the peace we seek.
Now,
My family is not a military family. My father couldn't serve in World War II due to having polio as a boy. But my grandfather was in World War I and two uncles served, one in World War II and one after. Growing up, I joined Cub Scouts and progressed all the way through Boy Scouts and became an Eagle Scout. Scouting teaches taking responsibility and doing service to the troop, community, and the nation. Also, I read a lot of science fiction while growing up. One author that influenced me was Robert Heinlein. One of the premises in his Future Human Civilization was that you had to do at least 2 years' service to earn the right to vote and run for office. Not just military service, but any approved government service. When I got to college in the fall of 1967, ROTC had just been made voluntary, but I started taking classes anyway as a continuation of Boy Scout training and earning my right to vote. It was the height of the Vietnam War and the draft was still going. I figured I would end up going into the military, so I might as well go as an officer. Taking the oath for my commission was quite an honor and commitment, as I found out over the years. I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same. Not an easy road. I served 2 years on active duty and was then released during the drawdown after Vietnam. I ended up in the U.S. Army Reserve and continued to serve, 1 weekend a month and 2 weeks in the summer, but it was usually more time. In August 1990, my reserve unit was called up for Desert Storm. I spent over 9 months helping to send over 8,000 troops, both women and men, to war. After 24 years, I retired from the U.S. Army active reserve, but continued to be recallable to active service. I've continued to serve, being an election poll worker, being on a committee vetting young women and men applying to the military academies, and voting. I believe in this country and its basic foundations, and I will continue to serve.
Why I serve. My father's family came to America in the early 1600s. They worked hard and did the best they could as farmers, ministers, and business people. They served their country in the military during the Revolutionary War and on both sides in the Civil War, then went home and took up their regular lives. But 2 generations ago, my grandfather and one of his sisters chose to go into the military and make careers there. Great Aunt Tempe was one of the first women to serve legally. She was a Navy yeomanette and was just down the hall from Navy Secretary Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Granddaddy started out in the Texas militia, chasing Pancho Villa, and was then federalized and ended up in the European trenches during World War I. After being home a year, he decided to follow what was happening with airplanes in the military. Over the next almost 40 years of this adventure, he and his family, including my dad and his sisters, served in our colony of the Philippine Islands, China under Chiang Kai-shek, and he was in the Pacific Theater during World War II. In 1943, my dad went into the Army after high school and served in the European theater. After I joined the Army, I found out that he had been involved in opening some of the concentration camps, which explained so many things he taught us while growing up. It may also have been one of many things that led him and my mother to join the Unitarian Church after they got married. Because my dad had grown up in multiple countries and languages, he had a unique understanding of the world to come. He thought that after World War II, he could make a difference for our country by serving in the military. He earned a commission in the brand new U.S. Air Force, and our adventures took us to a constitutional monarchy, countries that were experiencing political upheavals, and most of the United States during his 26 years of service. One of my dad's sisters chose to join the Air Force as a nurse. When I asked why, she said for the chance to travel while serving our country in a job she loved. My mother's brothers, both first-generation Americans, also served during World War II, and one chose to stay in the Navy afterwards. So this was my family background. Then when I was 7, I read a book by Robert Heinlein, who served aboard ship in the Pacific during World War II. The premise was that you could not have full citizenship, including the right to vote and hold office, unless you had given at least 2 years of service of some kind to your country. That really made a deep impact on me when you added in the family history of serving our country and being raised a Unitarian, where social justice is such a major component of faith and life. I came of age during a time when women's work and career opportunities were extremely limited. But the military ran by regulations, and it did not matter what color, creed, or gender you were when you were assigned a job. There were still limitations, but not like anywhere else in the world. And I would be able to serve my country with an unusual skill set growing from 2 generations of living in multiple countries, cultures, and languages, in addition to what I had learned from personal experience. So I became part of the 3rd of 4 generations of women and men in our family who have served in the military. I truly realized how serious it was when I raised my hand for the first time and swore, "I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same." I enjoyed my 9 years of military service, but due to some family problems, I had to leave. Then I met Dave and discovered he felt the same way about serving our country, and I ended up back in the military as an officer's wife. But I continue to serve our country in many different ways, including the privilege of being a poll worker in various social justice projects, both within and without our Unitarian Universalist faith.
Hi, I'm Phil Hahn. I suspect I'd get some flack if I didn't say that, but it would be my nature not to say it. So, what makes a good video share? Brevity, sincerity, speaking from the heart, topical cohesiveness? I'm not really sure. Rev Denny says just about anything that isn't being a douchebag is a good reflection, no rules. He suggests that many people may be curious to hear anything from me because so little is known in the community. So here goes. This is my tribe. When I was a freshman in college in 1980, I lived on the 7th floor of an 8-story dorm. We in Huber House of South Quad were a close-knit group. Across the street was a fraternity known as the Cat Frat due to an ugly incident in the 70s. At that time, there were 7 active members. One of our group was a legacy in that frat. He negotiated a deal with his father and the active members so that we would all rush the frat as long as we were guaranteed that everyone would be accepted as a pledge. As the frat history is written, we helped save that chapter. So officially speaking, I am a member of the Peninsula chapter of Alpha Delta Phi, but really I was gone before the full recovery took root. As part of the pledge process, the actives were mentors to a few of the pledges. Because there were so many more of us, each had to share a few. At the end, we were given a mug with the nickname that our mentor came up for us. There's my mug, and my nickname was Loudmouth. So he took great pains to explain that this was an ironic nickname because he had barely heard me speak more than 2 words during the entire pledge semester. So I'm not the most outgoing, super expressive person in any group. Oddly enough, I consider myself to be a very passionate individual. As a young person, it was really more shyness and social anxiety. As an adult, that's not really the right explanation. My propensity to dream and abstract took me down a road of spiritual investigation. And it sounds really corny to say that today, but that's what I would have called it then. The writings and experiences of Eastern philosophy and Zen Buddhism in particular really resonated with me. And as Spockish as I am in my logic, resonance tops reason for me. I remember being over the house of a friend talking philosophy of existence with his dad. And it was later in the evening, and he grabbed a mug off the table and he slammed it down on the table and he said, "This is a mug, it exists." And I think that was the end of the conversation with him. And maybe also there was some Carlos Castaneda influence in there as well. He was a nice guy, but he didn't really like that kind of conversation. So the notion of non-ego is important to me. It's a different sort of non-reality. It's very easy to be misunderstood trying to communicate these impressions. So in general, I don't really try directly anymore to do that. Like so many areas of personhood, it presents a dilemma or a contradiction of sorts. Oh, dilemmas. Paradox, Zen koans. Has anyone read Gödel Escher Bach? Great book. That and the Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance are at the top of my list of all-time favorites. And also a shout out to Shobo Genzo and the Diamond Sutra too. So, dilemmas. I have advanced degrees in computer engineering, bioengineering, neuroscience, and math. But I don't consider myself an engineer, a scientist, or a mathematician. I have a minor in music and years of experience singing and playing instruments, but I don't consider myself a musician. I've read Lord of the Rings in 4 languages, and The Hobbit in a couple as well, and studied several others, but I don't consider myself to be multilingual, a polyglot. I've been called a Renaissance man and a gentle giant, and it embarrasses me very much. As a perfectionist, I see all the flaws, my own first and foremost. You'll hear some in a few minutes too. So the dilemma, I am what I am, and that doesn't need a name or a concept. But at the same time, I know I am what I am not. And when I think about that, it hurts my pride. I'm not all of these things that I see and think about. So who is it that experiences that pride? And then, like a leaf on a river, that dilemma just floats by. So dilemmas aren't problems. They aren't really demanding solution, merely contemplation. Another book I recommended now and then is Finite Games, Infinite Games, that goes into that in a little bit of more detail. The purpose of every question is not simply to have an answer, it's an invitation to explore the ideas. And I think that's a good place to leave this topic for now. The song I put together for Memorial Day was suggested by Ron Prosek. It's a hymn called Eternal Father. The lyrics are a bit churchy, but give it a chance. When the song came up, I knew I wanted to try this for a few reasons. I haven't been playing for a few years after some health problems, and this gives me a chance to get back into it. I first played the song with my son, Bridger. He had just started learning the trombone, and I, of course, decided I had to get a trumpet and try that out. When he brought home Eternal Father, it was something we could play together. It was simple enough. It was the first piece that I performed in public, too. Our older son, Deacon, had a hockey game in Mentor. I convinced Bridger to play with me like we were a two-man pep band. We had Eternal Father and one other song, Hang On Sloopy. We probably played Eternal Father only once or twice. It's not really a peppy song. And Sloopy probably 10 or 15 times. But that's all we had. After the game, we rushed up to ask Deacon if he had heard it on the ice while he was playing. He's a goalie, so a lot of equipment. We weren't sure. And he was a bit distraught. His reaction was not what we were expecting. It turned out that we weren't always stopping when play started, and that his team was at risk of forfeiting if they knew that we were associated with his team in some way. That didn't happen. So it was a good evening. Bridger didn't really play with me too much as he became involved with music at school. He liked it at the time, but he didn't love it the way I did. And Fathers and Sons, that's the way it happened. But that performance, that's a great memory for me. Eternal Father is also known as the Navy hymn. That has connections for me too. I've had a love of the sea since I was very young, even though we lived in urban Cleveland. I'm not sure where that came from. I always dreamed of sailing and shared naval architecture books with my dad. I would go through the pages of boating magazines and dream. Maybe it was escapism, I don't know. As I was finishing high school, I had to make some decisions, and I chose to go to the University of Michigan on a 4-year Navy ROTC scholarship. Sorry, Buckeye fans. I chose an engineering school because I was told I was very good in science and math. I didn't know what engineering was. My reason? I want to fly jets. This was before the movie, so I feel a smidge less silly there. I chose the Navy because, well, the ocean. In the end, I spent a summer on a variety of ships, but I transferred to CWRU rather than finishing up with the program and staying in the Navy as an officer. Whether I would have made it to flight school or not is questionable. But that's another story entirely. On its surface, the hymn is a plea for protection of those at sea. Beneath that is the metaphor of life or spiritual life as a turbulent sea. And for many people, our present times qualify as a turbulent sea. Oh, hear us when we cry to thee for those in peril on the sea. The original lyrics are no doubt addressed to some image of a white-haired, white-bearded, white-skinned elderly man. After 12 years of Catholic education, I have plenty of tolerance for such images. But again, that's a topic for another day. I would just suggest that you listen to this beautiful hymn, or my somewhat awkward rendition of it, and simply keep in mind those struggling now in turbulent waters, and those many life preservers that are no longer with us.
Tomorrow is Memorial Day, the unofficial first day of summer, and more importantly, the day when we in the United States honor the people who died while serving our country in various branches of the military. And today is National Pansexual and Panromantic Visibility Day. I have a friend who asked on Monday, as he always does, "So what are you preaching about on Sunday?" And I was still at that point without much of a plan, so I mentioned those two facts. And he nodded amiably at the first fact and rolled his eyes about the second, so hard that I thought it was going to knock the earth off of its axis. "I can't keep up," he said. "What does that even mean? What does the word panromantic even mean?" Now, I like to think of myself as being all on top of the latest inclusive language, especially as it relates to gender and sexual minorities. But this one was new to me. I mean, I know that pansexual means that you are attracted to people who identify as all genders: cisgender, transgender, genderqueer, gender fluid, and non-binary, among others. But panoramic people can be romantically attracted to any of those folks because, of course, engaging with people sexually and romantically are two different things. So they have two different titles. I hope I don't have to explain that. But wait, maybe I do, because it's actually really confusing. There are people who have deep, intimate, romantic relationships with other human beings without it ever moving into the bedroom. And so there's a difference between being pansexual, attracted to all genders, and being panromantic, romantically attracted to all genders. Now, all of this matters because as I was reading Stephen Schick's beautiful and poetic reflection that Dick shared earlier, I was completely moved by the imagery of wading in the water of salt tears on the riverbanks of a new day, letting my vision focus as others do the same. But when I got to the litany of binary identities, men and women, husbands and wives, sons and daughters, brothers and sisters, it stopped me in my tracks. I literally paused in my breath, thinking about all of the people that I know and care about and love who don't fit neatly into any of those binary gendered categories. Now, Reverend Schick, in that piece, asks the Spirit of Life to teach him to use his life to move the world a step closer to peace. And this is a man. I use that word intentionally because that is how he identifies. He is a man who has committed himself to peacemaking, as surely as soldiers commit themselves to the missions of military actions. And he's published 2 books, both about making peace and manifesting change in the world, beginning with one's own life. Now, I could just dismiss him as a hypocrite, a guy who's seeking change for others but not for himself, and just leave it at that. But I want to honor him. So I did the research and I learned that Reverend Schick is no hypocrite. For over 30 years, he's been advocating for the rights of sexual and gender minorities to marry and to simply exist free from harassment, as he has been working in the peace movement. The two issues are so intertwined for him, they're the same thing. At one point, he even founded and hosted an NPR show called Consider the Alternatives, where he constantly explored the intersection of inclusion and peace as he interviewed players on the national stage. Something tells me that even though the good Reverend has been retired a while, given the opportunity, he'd probably write a very different prayer now, one with less binary language. I wouldn't be surprised to learn that he's actually written it, and I just haven't come across it. Because for him, that quiet struggle, the struggle for greater inclusion as a mechanism for peace, is at the core of his life's work. It's his mission, his ultimate commitment. You might find yourself asking, what does any of this have to do with Memorial Day, other than the coincidence of them occurring on the same weekend? Well, my experience, of course, isn't exhaustive. But every single person I've encountered talking about why they chose to risk their lives in service to their country said they did it to protect all of us, not just themselves. Liberty, freedom, democracy, our Constitution, the American way. And virtually all of those people have gone on to talk about the autonomy of individuals, their right to pursue happiness unmolested by tyranny, including the tyranny of our own government. And what could be more central to personal autonomy and happiness than expressing oneself and one's love authentically? Other soldiers and former soldiers I've talked to have expressed to me the desire to protect our national heritage of discovery and invention, our constant growing and learning and evolving. And what could be more evolutionary and revolutionary than our understanding of the human brain and human experiences and finding new ways to express those? Now, still other soldiers have expressed to me a calling to protect the most vulnerable among us. 20 so years ago, I talked with a World War II veteran with a developmentally disabled brother. And he was shocked and angered by the Third Reich's treatment of people like his brother, viewing them as unworthy of life, disposable. And that was what drove him, an otherwise very peaceful man, to enlist and to fight and to ultimately kill. He, like so many other soldiers, risked his life so that others may live. Countless soldiers have died so that others may live. As I think about soldiers who have given their lives for freedom, and ministers who've been called to create a more peaceful and inclusive world where we are all free to pursue our own happiness, it's the commitment that stands out to me. Freedom can't exist without commitment to the whole, commitment to a community that includes all individuals. And all means all, even those expressing themselves in a way that's new to you, a way that you don't understand, that maybe you don't even have the bandwidth in the moment to try to understand. Now, some may respond the way my friend did the other day, with an eye roll and an expression of fatigue over all there is to learn and to readapt to. That response isn't too different from the way many of us are responding to the barrage of news about COVID-19, how it's spread, whether or not people who have gotten sick may or may not be vectors or susceptible to reinfection, and all of the conflicting information about how and when organizations like ours should reopen. But as they say, the struggle is real. There are no easy answers in this time and place where every single question feels like a conundrum, a question that can't be answered. I am eternally grateful for those who gave their lives in service to our country. Not because I necessarily agree with the military rationale for engaging in particular conflicts like those waged in Korea, Vietnam, or Afghanistan, but because those soldiers made a commitment to their people, to us, to me, even those who've never met me. And having this chance to talk about the soldiers who've paid the ultimate price for freedom gets me to slow my pace, that I might imagine what it was like for them, what it was like for their families to receive the news of the loss and to rebuild their lives. Just like the current war against this novel strain of coronavirus and sheltering in place to protect the vulnerable have gotten me to slow my pace and think about all those who have died, their families, and the sacrifices being made by the people working on the front lines. May it be so.
Okay, I think we're live. Hello, East Shore. Miss you all a bunch. We're gonna play 2D tunes. We'll see how it works out. The first is called Winder Slide, which actually, oh, okay, I'm supposed to look at you, not him.
You know what I look like.
Winder Slide is an old time tune that actually was written 5 years ago, 7 years ago, something like that. From a musician, dear friend of ours who lives in Kent. The next one is, so we're doing Winder Slide and then into Camp Meeting on the 4th of July.
Which has never been done before, so we'll see how it goes.
Yeah. Adventure with us, it'll be fun. folks.
One of the best things about congregational life is getting the chance each week to slow down the pace, to gather online or in person and reflect on our lives and commitments, to learning new ways of being together and learning about how others are expressing themselves and the values that drive them in their lives. And we can't do any of that if we don't make the commitment to make sure this place continues to exist. We support the staff and the facilities so we can continue to be harbingers of peace and inclusiveness. So this morning, as always, I'm asking you to fulfill your pledge to East Shore and its mission to love, revere, discover, and connect by sending in your check. And if you're new to East Shore and have not made a pledge, please consider supporting us financially so that we can continue to be here, no matter what happens in the coming months. Thank you. Thank you for your commitment, and thank you for being here with us today.
I am Ricky Beck, a member of the choir and the worship arts team. For today's benediction, I have the words of the Reverend Sarah Lawal. When the pull of the wish to disappear takes hold with all its harsh realities, may we conjure up that fierce love to bring our hopeful vision into being, discovering the humanity, bravery, goodness still calling us forth. May we breathe into that story and make it come alive.
We join hands in Unitarian Universalist Fellowship,
pledging ourselves to an individual religious freedom,
which transcends all creeds, not to think alike,
but to journey together.